All right, episode 2 here for our summer series. We're going to do linebackers and corners and safeties. We'll round out the defense today. If you missed it, we did the defensive line in the first episode. We have lumped everything else together because if you haven't been paying attention, we'll yell it at you here again on today's episode. Everything but boundary corners sort of are interchangeable for this group. Obviously, there's going to be a free safety, there's going to be a strong safety, and they're going to spend most of their time there. But other than that, going to be a lot of mixing and moving of parts. George, let's get you brought with you the PFF grades. So
Sure.
we'll kind of just start here with the corners.
Sure.
And we'll go straight to the draft pick. The number 1 draft pick this year, Emmanuel Forbes out of Mississippi State. Let's take a look here. I have his information up here. 6 foot, of course, all the information, everything leading, after the draft was his size. They've got him listed as 180. I have heard he's put on a little bit of weight. We've seen the pictures, though. He is as skinny as advertised. Let's put it that way. His calves look like my forearms. But a rangy guy. That's kind of a word everybody uses, but it is. He's got super long arms. He's what they're looking for now. Always around the ball, and I think what we find is that those takeaways, while sometimes takeaways can be fluky, right? But I think just being around the ball that much of the time, in my mind, alleviates some of all that flukiness. George, what do the numbers say from PFF?
Yeah, so to break it down, I have like variable scores. So you can always kind of chime in with me throughout the show, Doug. I have overall PFF score. I have coverage and run defense. I also have alignments and their snap counts. So throughout the show, you can ask me any of those questions, and I got it for us. In regards to overall PFF score, we had Kendall Fuller with a 76.6, Benjamin St-Juste with a 58.3, Danny Johnson with an 81, Christian Holmes with a 47.1. And obviously with Emmanuel Forbes being a rookie, he doesn't have any PFF scores right now. So those are the cornerbacks. I'm going to safety whenever you're ready.
Okay. Grab me one more. Tariq Castro Fields, if you have it.
Give me a
moment.
moment.
How much he played last year. Let's start going through them individually. Adam, what was your thoughts when you looked at the tape and kind of went back after the draft pick and took a look at Forbes? What are your initial thoughts?
I just think, you also have to go by what, some of his offensive teammates, particularly, Jahan Dotson, who's been very vocal this camp about his opinions of, his quarterback and, in particular Forbes. And, the consensus is that, he's looking like a veteran out there. He's not really making a lot of the mistakes you see from rookies and everything. Again, we'll see a lot more in training camp, but it sounds like, he's really adapted to this playbook. He's aggressive. And I think everyone, you're going to have to wait till the season because, the main question is his physicality. But again, if you just look at the tape in the SEC, he was plenty physical. There wasn't times where you're seeing him getting bowled over. And, granted, Mississippi State didn't put him in position to, really get abused. So he'll definitely have some lumps early on. But I think that his style is really fitting what Del Rio wants to do, which is a lot of pressure up front. And, you talk about tip balls, Forbes is opportunistic, if not anything. So I think that that's what we're going to see early on. And, we've seen, I think last I checked was 3 or 4 interceptions and, various 7-on-7s, 11-on-11. So I think he's got a nose for the ball.
Fans will not like to hear this because they don't like their favorite team's players compared to the enemy. But I have heard several times that like Diggs is sort of the comp where he is always around the ball, but because he is willing to go for it, he obviously will get burnt. I mean, I think that's something that as fans, we have to realize corners get burnt. That's what they do. And that's why, from guys we've talked to, you have to have zero memory to play that position. It's why it's so hard to find guys that can just live out there on those islands and put it out there for the world to see, because I think that's the big thing is that you got to, he's going to go for him. He's going to get some, but I think he's going to get burnt too, a lot like Diggs will. George, I think we can, if we agree on Forbes starting on the outside on one side, I think the biggest maybe conversation, let's call it, going into actual camp is who plays opposite. Read out those Kendall Fuller numbers again, because I think people will be surprised. He was very good once he got moved outside last year.
100%. Yeah. So Kendall Fuller, he actually had a 76.6 PFF score, 15th overall out of 119 cornerbacks. He had a coverage rate of 75.6 and a run defense of 73.7. So Kendall Fuller, man, I think if you're asking me the question, who's going to start on the boundary, I do think it is going to be Emmanuel Forbes and Kendall Fuller starting out week 1 as the starters. Kendall Fuller, he's 28. He's one of the most experienced people in the defensive backfield. He had 1,030 snaps. He had more snaps than anybody else on the defense last year at the cornerback position. And I think that I think Jack Del Rio trusts him, Ron Rivera trusts him, and I think he actually fits for what they want to do. Benjamin St-Juste, they did invest in him as a 3rd-round pick. He has that big size, but I do think he's more of like a man cover, more of a physical cornerback. And I think we're going to start transitioning more to more zone coverage, even more so than last year. And last year, I looked at PFF rates as well. I don't have the full numbers. It got up to like week 15, but around 70% of Washington's coverage was in zone last year. So if you have someone that's kind of reading off the ball and likes to jump coverage like Emmanuel Forbes, that's kind of Fuller's strength as well. That is not Benjamin St-Juste's strength. Right. So I think Fuller and Forbes will be the first 2 trotting out there. But I think the one benefit is you do have Benjamin St-Juste in that back pocket. You have him on the bench, and he can play the position, and hopefully he grows a little bit further. But to answer that question, I think it's going to be Fuller and Forbes to start off, and it's a great problem to have some good depth like that. I like that.
It is a great problem to have, and it's one that I don't think we've had around here
yeah, for sure.
In a while. At any of the secondary positions, really, I think, Adam, if you can help explain a little bit to the viewers, we talk a lot about on the show, and actually credit to you, Adam, because I really had always just figured it'd be St-Juste outside, and you kind of were the one a couple of weeks ago that maybe made me think more and more about Fuller starting outside. When we talk about guys that need a boundary to help them, where the slot, you have both open sides. Some corners do better when they have that boundary line as an extra defender. Do me explain that a little bit to our viewers and listeners, what that kind of means and why it helps some guys more than others.
I think with the zone thing, it's about coverage help in the back end, because you have a lot of rotating, a lot of moving parts, so that can help. With St-Juste, I don't think he is as dependent as a lot of people think he is, because exactly, he's very physical, he's very good, when he's manning up. I look at him as a very situational kind of player, like just say stick him on the outside, he's there to stay. No, I think that's going to be the advantage they have with Forbes, because with Forbes and St-Juste, I think be matchup dependent. They'll be able to move him around. But really, to me, what it comes down to is backside help. So depending on the zone, the scheme, the cloud that they're playing, it's really about the assistance that they're going to get in the back end. And we talked about Forbes. Yeah, he'll get burned from time to time, hopefully not too often, but that also has to do a lot with the safeties, because there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of changes going in the back. We talk about Forrest and Curl, jumping in that, that deep space, but, we've heard a lot about Percy Butler really looking good in that role either. Also, and Martin, they're, drafting him to do that as well. So I think you're going to have a lot of help for the corners this year. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of guys put out on the islands, that we've seen in the past.
I mentioned Tariq Castro-Fields earlier. George, will you bring the numbers up for him?
Yeah.
I brought him up because you and I were talking, George, on your podcast.
The Sam Forte, right. Actually, yeah.
We asked him who was the guy nobody's talking about, kind of in the fan world, the guys around camp maybe got a better look at. And that was one of the guys he brought up. The team is high on him and his upside.
Yeah, for sure. So he has a very limited data point, actually. He only had 6 snaps last year. He played 5 in run defense and 1 in coverage. He had an overall grade of 63.1, run defense 60.4, and coverage 60.2. But honestly, for me, throw that number out. It's only 5 plays. You can't really have a total evaluation off of that, in my opinion. But
24 years old. This is only his 2nd year in the league. 6'1", 197. Adam, do you have anything more to add in on Tariq Castro-Fields? Are you familiar with him?
I watched some college film on good stuff there. But again, like you said, that there's just not enough, tape on the pros, putting him out in boundaries or moving him around to see how he can really do. So training camp, this is going to be a really interesting matchup, even though, how interesting is the back end of the cornerback matchups. But, I have them probably going the season with 5. Some people had him 6, but I think that, Castro Fields, Holmes, and Johnson will probably be battling out for 2 slots. But
I agree.
I keep coming back to, you don't see Del Rio get rid of his draft picks in the first 3 years. So unless Holmes really regresses, I think that, Castro Fields, that's a guy that you could probably slip onto the practice squad. We've seen with Danny Johnson, if someone else emerges, you can cut him, bring him back. But, I think that it'll be an uphill battle for him to beat out, one of Ron Rivera's draft picks.
Christian Holmes, Oklahoma State, got drafted 2 years ago. 6'1", 205. That's a boundary guy, or he plays in the slot, Adam?
Strictly boundary. He is stiff, but I have heard they have liked, how some of his fundamentals have been refined. They've liked some of the things they've seen. But again, we're talking about back end guys, so that that last one, probably that last spot, in the defensive backfield, it's going to be dependent on who really shines in camp. Because Holmes right now, he's just a guy. But like I said, a lot of teams, not too many teams, the 5th cornerback is something to talk about. Otherwise, he'd be somewhere else playing 3 or 4. So.
And one of those guys for us is Danny Johnson, who is one of these guys that you respect these guys, right? Because he just grinds, and every time you think Danny Johnson, where'd he go? Now he's right there on the team. They can't cut him off. And part of what you were saying there, Adam, is like what these guys have to do at the back end of this corner depth is play special teams.
Special teams.
And while Danny Johnson's really good in that nickel role, and I think that's where he's best at, and was really pretty good when he got his opportunities there last year. He's a special teamer through and through, and you need those guys, and that's fine. That's not a dig. I think people think that being the 4th or 5th corner and playing special teams is, still got a spot on the 53, and you're an injury away from being productive.
And to Danny Johnson's point, he actually has produced pretty well when he gets on the field. So looking at this, I was pretty impressed by him. He had 300 snaps last year. He started for 4 games. He had a PFF score of 81, as a reserve corner. And what I liked about him is he basically rotated different positions as well. He had 202 snaps as a slot corner, 44 out in the boundary. So he actually, I had that backwards. He had 202 that were out wide and 44 in the slot. So he can do multiple things.
I don't know why I thought he was a nickel guy.
Yeah, so honestly, I do like the fact that I respect those guys, people that grind, get on the practice squad when their number's called to get on the field. So I don't mind Danny Johnson at all. He's a good back end of the corner kind of guy.
It was necessity. He is a small slot guy. It was a necessity last year. Again, we talk about Benjamin St. Juice all we want, but the guy can't stay healthy. So that's why you see guys like him getting more snaps. But he's inside for sure. I don't trust him outside.
Yeah.
And the last guy who actually did get a lot of action last year is Rashad Wildgoose, who was productive when he got his opportunities. What were the numbers there? 5'10", 191 out of Wisconsin, 23 years old. What are the numbers, George?
Give me a moment for Wildgoose. I don't have him right handy. I pulled it up right now, though.
Yeah, but he's in that mix. As we look through it, Adam, while George is getting the numbers, it's basically, as I see it quickly, as I look here, you've got, it's interesting what happens with Troy Apke. People will laugh about that, but he's been a special team standout. Again, you need those guys. But it's Troy Apke, Tariq Castro Fields, Emmanuel Forbes, Kendall Fuller, Christian Holmes, Danny Johnson, St. Juice, and I guess Wildgoose. Those are the guys who are going to be fighting it out for those, to your point, depending on how many safeties they keep, 5 or 6 corners, I guess.
Right. So I got Wildgoose whenever you're ready. So Wildgoose, 179 snaps in the slot. He was 3 on the boundary corner. He basically had a overall grade of 50.7, had a very low run defense of 40.5, and a coverage grade of 53.9. On 20 targets, 11 receptions given up for Wildgoose. So I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's too promising there. He's obviously a back end of the player, 6th-round pick from Buffalo, but we'll see how it turns out.
He's probably at the bottom of that list with Castro Fields that we kind of talked about there. Okay, we'll transition from there to the linebackers. I brought this up earlier. I think it's important. We'll kind of work outside in the line. So many people have complained about the linebacker depth, and while I agree that there is not much depth there on the team, I think last year they were in nickel correct me if I'm wrong, fellas, but it was like 80% of the time, 75 to 80% of the time. I think I saw they were in base 43 4 snaps last year. Not per game. Like the entirety of the season, they were in, 43. So, I mean, I would think that you're looking a lot more 5-1-5, 4-2-5, that kind of scenario than you are your base 4-3. You got Cody Barton. I thought this was interesting. I don't know if you guys saw this. I retweeted it the other day. Maybe Michael Phillips was in one of his columns, but basically Cody Barton said, I left money on the table come to Washington because I was told I'd have an opportunity to get be green dotted, as he said. And I thought that was really interesting. It makes me feel like they obviously had given him, at least verbally, this notion that he was going to get snaps, and that's why he's here. I don't think they did. They gave Jamin Davis the green dot for a little while at the end last year, but he was not playing middle linebacker. He was still off. I remember thinking that they had moved him to middle, and somebody corrected me on Twitter. I went back and looked at the tape. Sure enough, he did. When they gave him the dot, they did not move him to middle. So I think it's interesting with Cody Barton. Adam, I know you've done a little work on him. Tell us what you think about him while he's doing that, George. If you'll pull up the numbers for him.
I got it.
Go ahead with the numbers first then, and then Adam will get your thoughts on him.
Yes, so Cody Barton had a PFF score of 63.7. He had a coverage PFF score of 60 and a run defense of 64.4. This is all in Seattle, obviously. He had 894 snaps in Seattle, and he had 91 tackles last year with a 6% miss rate, which is actually better than Cole Holcomb. So pretty interesting.
Obviously, Cody Barton being the replacement for Holcomb this year as he went on to the Steelers. Adam, we've talked a little bit about Barton over the years, or not over the years, but over the offseason here. What tell us again for those that weren't on the episode last time.
Yeah, I was just trying to pull up my article on him, but last year he really didn't see extended time with the starting unit. I think it was to the last 6 games. But when he did get his opportunity, he really shined. There was some instances where he did get blown up when in run support, really, just getting engulfed by, bigger offensive linemen. But, I think when they talk about the green dot, I think what excites people is, his ability to drop in coverage. He's always going to be compared through this year, at least to, Cole Holcomb. And I think one thing that you're getting in him, you don't get quite maybe the as a ferocious hitter as Cole Holcomb is, but you're getting a guy that's, better in coverage, proven. I wouldn't go that far because, like I said, although he had a lot of snaps, a lot of those snaps weren't starting snaps until the last about 5 weeks of the season. But again, I don't know if George put this out. If I'm repetitive, I apologize. But he had 68.6 passer rating while in coverage last year. So that's something that Washington really hasn't had for a while in their linebackers. So I think the hope is that you'll be able to use him in situations like that. But again, I'll come back to it. I think that they'll be using a lot more defensive backs, and I don't see a situation where Jamin gets kicked off the field and it's just Barton. I see a lot of situations where it's one linebacker. I think they like what they have in Davis as far as, his pursuit angles. Barton, that's a lot of the questions that I have for him is his pursuit angles. He looks good, when he's dropping his hips, going back in coverage, but when he had to go lateral, that there was concern there. I mean, he didn't really get beaten up over the top. 1 touchdown given up last year, but he had 2 interceptions and 3 pass breakups. So again, just on the raw numbers alone, there is something to be excited about. Like if you look at that, Washington hasn't had that probably since London Fletcher, a guy that can really, you can just trust back there. But he may be, going for the green dot. But Washington's a little unusual. I think that we're going to see through the years that through the season that multiple players are going to be wearing that green dot, not him, because usually, that entails a guy playing, 60, 70% of the snaps. No way. I see Barton getting past, 40 would be max, and that's generous. So it'll be interesting to see how they utilize him, but it's all about matchups. And I think if going against teams, Philadelphia, I think that's a situation where you could see him get a lot more snaps as long as, we're not seeing him miss any tackles because, heavy run teams, you want to have a guy like that. He's got better size than Holcomb, again, better in coverage. So, we'll see.
When you say that he had a 68% passer rating while in coverage, I'll play the dummy here. I'm assuming that's the quarterback rating while he was playing against them.
Right.
Okay.
It was his coverage grade. Yeah. But again, a lot of that got inflated, like I said, through those last 4 or 5 weeks because he had a lot of time on the field. A lot of it was due to injury. A lot of it was due to Seattle just, moving things around. But, I've talked to Seattle. As soon as we signed him, I talked to, Seattle fans. I know they're just diehards and they weren't happy to see him go. They didn't want to see him get paid a lot of money, but they really thought that they could get him back on the cheap. So for what Washington got, a lot of fans in Seattle thought, they should have re-signed him. So that's always a good sign.
I love what you nailed it. Like, I love what you said, Adam. I think Cody Barton's projection is very similar to Cole Holcomb's, right? I feel like the team basically wanted to get a healthier Cole Holcomb is what, in my opinion, Cody Barton's kind of on the upswing. He potentially could improve. Like, they liked Cole Holcomb. They potentially wanted to keep him as well, but the injuries were just taking his toll. He only played, 7 games last year, 4 games last year for Cole Holcomb. He basically was in it for most of the season. So they like that Cody Barton upswing there. I do think I love what you said about the Philadelphia Eagles. I do think that he may play heavy in some games, but he will be more of a substitute package linebacker. But I also believe that his narrative's kind of being untold a little bit right now. I know there was a lot of talk about, hey, Khaleke Hudson's getting all these reps in training camp, and Khaleke Hudson might be the starter over Barton. I don't honestly believe that to be the case. I think it's just an indoctrination period for Cody Barton. He's new to the team. He doesn't really know the playbook. He's trying to figure things out, how to work with people. And I think he's just basically just kind of taking a step back into watching approach right now. He's kind of seeing how he fits into the defense. I think Khaleke Hudson's a little bit further ahead in regard to his knowledge of the defense. So they're kind of putting him out there to not slow down the rest of the team, because the rest of the team is already incumbents. He's the whole team is pretty much coming back on the defensive side of the ball, except for Cody Barton. He's a new addition. So I think Barton will get up to speed eventually. I'm not going to say he's a diehard take over the game type of linebacker, but I can kind of envision kind of a Cole Holcomb role for him in DC. And I'm excited. I mean, we'll see how he goes.
One stat that I just noticed in my article that I was saying was 6.7 yards per reception, which was a league low during that time. And that's a good stat to have, because you're basically talking about, he's not chasing guys from behind. He's keeping relatively everything in front of him. So that's what you want to see in a middle linebacker. This is not a guy that's really going to wreak havoc around the line. This is a guy that you can drop in that 10-yard range, try to keep everything in front of him, set your team up for, a lot of 3rd and 4s, 3rd and 5. So I think that was an interesting stat as well that came out for him.
And I definitely think there's a world in which they are in a 4-2-5.
Yes.
Quite a bit. That still allows them to get one of their extra safeties on the field. It allows them to be a little bit bigger with Barton than it would with some of their safeties. I think he's a little bit. Do you have the number? Do you have the height and weight on Khaleke Hudson, George? I actually was getting ready to go there next. I'm glad you had brought him up, because he is getting work. And while I agree he's probably not the starter at the end of the day, I know many people, including myself, really high on him coming out of college, out of Michigan, where he played that Viper money backer. It's the Buffalo nickel here. I thought it was interesting that they've got him over in that middle spot now, probably to your point, George, which was a good one, that a lot of times guys you see in the offseason are out there so that everybody else isn't getting bogged down by the new guy needing to figure it out.
Especially during this time of the year, in June and July. Once August starts coming around, we're going to start seeing training camp battles and fighting for position time. I think they're trying to install the defense right now, and they wanted to have the most knowledgeable people on the field. Khaleke Hudson is 6'2", 220. So actually, he's kind of smaller than I thought. I thought he might have been a little bit taller than that, but 6'2", 220.
And that makes sense as to why he was kind of in that
hybrid role.
That Viper role that kind of is, it looks more like a safety, but probably not quite as fast as you'd like. I don't have like his 40 numbers up or anything, or his splits, but I have in my mind that he was not all that quick. And then of course behind him, it's funny because if you look at the actual, I've got the list here. It's Cody Barton, Jamin Davis, Milo Eifler, Dejon Harris, Khaleke Hudson, and David Mayo. I mean, that's the list, right? So I mean, outside of Hudson, Barton, and Davis, I mean, there's not a ton to write home about. And the point being, and brought it up at the top of the show, and I will continue trying my best to pound the message home, that's by design. You know, they could have gone out and had a full 43 type middle linebacker and outside linebackers and set the whole thing up. It's just not what they do. So having a lot isn't necessary. Now, I will say, Adam, they've got zero room for injury error.
Yeah.
Like the guys they got behind them don't excite anybody, I can't imagine.
And then, you know, and I'll throw in a wild card. Andre Jones Jr., who was drafted in the 7th round, you know, he was projected coming out as a 3-4 outside linebacker, you know, 6'5", 258. He played a lot of linebacker in high school and college, you know, 6 years at Louisiana State. I heard that, you know, they would like to get him on that final 53 if he can progress, you know, have him a situational pass rusher, you know, an outside linebacker. You know, again, you're still talking about, you know, 15% of the snaps, something like that. But that's also a guy to look at, even though he's listed as defensive end on their breakdown on their website. I talked to Doc Walker, talked to so many people. I'm like, so is he just a straight defensive end? They said, no, they like him a lot in that hybrid outside linebacker role. And they don't have anyone like that. So that'll be interesting to watch. I don't know if he's going to be able to crack the 53, you know, with who they have as the other pass rushers. So it would have, someone would have to give. But yeah, that's another name to watch.
It would allow them to sneak him on as a linebacker instead of a D line, whereas we talked about in the previous episode, they're pretty stacked. You know, it's going to be hard to get on as a D end with this group. It's interesting. We had brought this up in the group chat, right, George, about Adam saying that he had heard this. It surprised a lot of people.
I love it.
That was the word.
I love it. I mean, that's definitely what it's all about, right? Adam got his insight. He's sharing his opinion. I'm really keeping an eye on it. I really do hope Andre Johnson shines, you know, provides an outside linebacker role. One thing I want to touch on is I'm just really happy with. I know it's going to sound funny, it might be blasphemous, but Jack Del Rio, like he gets a lot of like critiques, and you know, people say he's a dinosaur and he has a very closed-minded vision on a defense. But what we're hearing is how dynamic and how flexible the defense actually is, which I think is pretty impressive. Like, we keep talking about Jamin Davis in the linebacker role. I think Cam Curl is going to be playing more in the box. I think we have a lot of flexibility that we can basically move some things around. Doing some research for this show, I do think Cam Curl would be more of like a dime backer with Jamin Davis potentially. Yep. I think he'll be the primary guy covering tight ends. I think he has the flexibility to do that, which also, you know, provides more flexibility for our nickelback and our other corners. I think you know, Quan Martin, like I think he's going to be an exceptional piece once he gets up to speed. People definitely, you know, people drag Bobby McCain, and I can see where they're coming from in regard to like mishaps in coverage, but he was a flexible piece. He could play corner. He could flex all the way out to free safety, be a single high at any given point. And I can see Quan Martin also doing that, but with a more of an athletic profile. He's faster, can jump higher, he's stronger. And I think he has a higher ceiling than Bobby McCain ever did. One of the things that I loved about it, and I was doing some like film research on this, is the fact that they hide coverages where they might have like a too high coverage will be like Forrest and Cam Curl. Cam Curl will rotate down for a tight end, and then Bobby McCain would shoot up and become the free safety or provide like cover two, like cloud coverage in the backfield. And I could see Quan Martin doing that as well. So there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of hidden like elements to the defense I think is going to be coming with this year. I'm really excited about the flexibility. And, you know, we touched on Percy Butler. Like, I love him too. I think he has some potential. He plays with like, you know, fire under his pants, man. He's a high energy player. So I'm excited about that too. So it'll be good.
I am too. You make a great point, George. And I think it doesn't get talked about enough when the two of them, Ron and Del Rio, got here. Mm-hmm. I certainly was part of the crowd that said these dinosaurs, you know, the game has passed them by. They've been left behind. And to their credit, they've been kind of at the forefront, actually, of this movement to a 4-2-5. They were really early on this idea. I mean, you know, they were trying to get that Buffalo nickel sorted out when it was Landon Collins, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And what I hope will happen is that with the pieces that they have now, with the Forrests and the Butlers, and even Reeves. When I talk to Reeves, he's kind of been assured he'll get more on the field playing time this year, which I think is nice because he's another one of those guys, right? Where like the Danny Johnsons of the world, you get him on the field and he just knows where to be. Yeah. And him and Curl just seem to have, but I guess long way to get to. I hope that they're able to use that to get Curl down in the box more. And we talk about this Buffalo nickel and who's going to play it, whether it be Quan Martin. Go back to McCain when they finally had the pieces so they could get McCain out of free safety and down into the nickel. To your point, George, allowed them to do so many more things because that really wasn't, when people were excited about McCain in Miami, it wasn't because he was a stellar free safety. No, it was because he was in the slot doing all those
flex.
things that could get back into free safety when needed. And I think that's one of the nice things about having Curl, Forrest, and I think Butler to start early. I had long thought it'd been Martin. He's a second-round pick, and I think Martin will get plenty of work this year. But the other thing that needs to be credited to the coaching staff is they've been very loyal to kind of the pecking order.
Yeah.
You were here first, work your butt off, it's your turn. And I think they'll do that for Percy Butler this year. I think he'll get first crack at whatever it is they're going to call it. Because I think when Percy Butler's on the field, you tell me if I'm wrong, Adam, but he'll be back into one of the safety spots and then they'll roll Curl down in, right?
Yeah, they call it's like a package. The Giants did it too over the last couple of years. That they were doing it too. But yeah, that's more of the Cobra, that three-headed look right there. And I agree with 100%. It's not just that he's paid his dues. I hear they are really excited with how much he's progressed. And I think that, they even thought when they got him, they got a steal because, just coverage alone, that's where he shines. The questions were him getting him close to the line. So the farther you can get him away, putting him in coverage, the better. But that's what's so good about Forrest too, that we saw what happened. They're always better with Curl in there, but when he had to go in that strong safety spot and that they can use Butler and even eventually Martin and that interchangeable role, I think it'll be hard to keep a guy like Butler off the field this year. I think that they're going to find ways, Butler, Forrest, and Curl. I think you're going to, I wrote an article, you're going to see them somewhere 70+% of the time, because I think the point is getting your best guys on the field. And I think that this right now, in my opinion, safety is the deepest position that they have next to wide receiver.
Got a question for you guys, if you don't mind, Doug.
Yeah,
no, so I love it. I love the flexibility of our safeties. I think Quan Martin's going to be an excellent piece. I think he's going to really change the whole dynamic of our defense. But let's say he kind of comes along slowly, because we automatically assume he's going to be a week 1 starter, but you never know. Maybe he doesn't start till week 3 or 4. Who's going to play that nickel position in your from your perspective? And do you think Benjamin St-Juste will potentially go back inside? Or I feel like they wouldn't want to mess around with Forbes and Fuller on the outside. So I'm kind of curious who you think will play nickel, in your opinion, both of you guys. Because Adam first, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I think if that happens, I think their plan is to have Martin in that slot. But if that happens, I think it makes more sense for St-Juste to slide inside instead of taking Fuller out from the outside. Forbes, I heard they're trying him everywhere, but I don't see a scenario where they're going to have him in the slot too much. I think through the year you'll see him here and there based on packages, because that's just how Del Rio is running this defense. But if they have to have necessity, St-Juste, will go inside.
And that's strictly if you're putting 3 corners out, Adam.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's you're playing a 3-corner alignment. Yeah.
Do you answer the question the same way if we're just talking about who gets into the nickel more often?
To nickel more often, I think that as long as Martin's progressing, it's him, because they're drafting him high to become that guy, and also he gives them the position flexibility to drop in safety, and where you can bring Curl down in the box too. So I think he makes even more sense than Benjamin St-Juste. Benjamin St-Juste, to me, having him, Fuller, and Forbes, I think that only happens if things aren't going right. Because if everything's going to plan, you want to have Forbes and Fuller on the outside and Quan slot, and you're gonna have Curl, Forrest, and Percy Butler as your interchangeable guys in the backfield. So ultimately I know that's what they want to do. But if they have to, because I know they like Benjamin St-Juste, but I also know that they double down at the position because they're not sold on his long-term future. And and Fuller too, again, he's not old, but I think that they're not banking on him past this year, because I think that he'd have to have a really good year to be around next year again, because he's got a pretty decently high salary for his production.
He does.
It'll be interesting to see what happens after the ownership comes. When I had Standig on, he made a great point where this would be one of those opportunities to extend Fuller, actually give him 2 more years on the contract, get that number down. By the time the contract's over, he's 32 or 31. But there's no money to be given out right now, so you're not extending anybody. To me, this is the biggest conversation of the offseason, how they do the back end, because you went right to Martin, and while I totally agree with that, Adam, we've also had the conversation of them getting the other 3 in with Butler.
Right.
So if they use Butler, Forrest, and Curl, yep, as the 3 safeties in the 5 DB looks.
Right.
I assume then that they roll Cam down into the big nickel. Percy goes to free safety and Forrest goes to strong.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, that's a look that I've seen. Yeah,
because Butler's not really a strong safety.
Not at all. Not at all.
Deep free safety.
Pure free safety. The thing about Martin Quan that's different though is you can just see his numbers from last year. Martin, if you had to do that, I feel confident that he could go to that strong safety role as well. Not huge, 5'11", 194, but 64 tackles, 3 tackles for a loss, and a sack, 2 forced fumbles last year. So he's shown his physicality. So I think that's a guy you can move around. But Percy Butler, to me, he is your true free safety. You can have him rotating in different packages, but you don't want him close to the line really, and run support or anything like that. I'm not sure how he's going to fare against the tight ends, but we talked about Curl. Out of anybody on this team, any linebacker, any DB, he is the best, that they have a coverage tight ends. And when they play teams with supreme tight ends, that's what I expect to see.
I agree. And then, gentlemen, the one last thing I want to add on is that's the beauty of all this, right? We have the flexibility to kind of do anything, right? We have the multiple safeties, the multiple cornerbacks, right? In the NFC East, we're going to face some big-bodied wide receivers as well with A.J. Brown and people like that. I don't think Benjamin St-Juice's story is untold yet. I think he still has plenty of life in him as well. I could definitely see things where it's like a trips left, 3 wide receivers on one side, 1 big wide receiver on the right. We have Benjamin St-Juice covering that man-on coverage on the other side to kind of like have that physical presence, that man-on coverage, because you can do multiple things. So I think the defense is going to be multiple. I do think it's going to be flexible. It's going to be really fun to watch all year long.
Yeah, Forbes is going to, I think, too, it's not going to be something like we're going to see Forbes playing, 80, 90% of snaps this year. I think it'll be closer to that 65% range, and they're going to get St-Juice and whoever else. I don't think that maybe, we start to get to the last 5-6 games, maybe, but I think that they're going to ease him in like that. This is just something I've watched from Del Rio and Rivera through the years is, they don't often just throw these guys out there like that, especially cornerbacks. So I think that he'll have a lot of support. I think that they're going to want to rotate a lot of guys as well, as much as possible.
George, do you have the percentage of snaps for Kendall Fuller last year?
Kendall Fuller almost predominantly on the field. I had the snap count. So Kendall Fuller led the entire defense with 1,030 snaps last year. Deron Payne was 907 with number 2.
That's insane, by the way.
It's nuts. It's a lot more. He had a lot more than Jonathan Allen for sure. And then it was Derek Forrest 849, and then finally Jamin Davis rolling out the 4th spot with 833. So the recap: Fuller, Payne, Forrest, Davis was the snap counts, which is so that just shows me the trust in Fuller, in my opinion.
Right.
Also, that they're willing to keep you out there if you do. I was going to say, because I didn't think that those corners came off very much. But they have enough. To your point, Adam, they could, if they wanted to. But it'll be interesting to see just what they think of. If they see Forbes as that 1st round overall lockdown corner, and he probably plays a ton like Fuller did last year. I think it's the third. If we're ranking position groups as we go through this, and I think all agree that defensive line is the best position group. Is it safety? Is it the DBs next or receivers next? Where do the DBs fit into the position group rankings to you guys?
I think it's DBs number 2. I think it's 1A even. I think the DBs are very flexible. I like the depth that the cornerbacks have. I like the depth that the safeties have. They're all on rookie contracts except for Kendall Fuller as well. So they're young and they're growing together. So I think there's a lot of upside there. The wide receivers are fantastic. That's a good problem to have as well. But obviously, with the wide receivers. Terry McLaurin's that proven alpha dog. Jahan Dotson will have a nice, I don't want to ruin it because we're going to talk about this in a week or two. Jahan Dotson is a strong candidate as well, another wide receiver one candidate. But, Curtis Barnes more of a flexible piece, and Diami Brown's more of an unknown. So I do think the defensive backs are more deep, and I like the flexibility that defensive backs offer. And I think I talked to Adam, I think maybe offline, but our defense has the potential to be exceptional next year. Top 10, even higher than that. Like, could be really dominant if everything clicks. So I'm really excited.
What did they end up last year? Were they top 10 or just outside the top 10?
So they were third. I think they were third in yards. I can pull it up right now, but I think they were third in yards and seventh in points. Actually, had a really good year last year. I'll pull it up right now while you guys talk.
Yeah, one of the things I will be interested to see when you pull up those numbers, George, is it kind of last year's defense reminded me a little bit of the offense. The offense for all the yards they put up between the 20s, just could not get it in the end zone. They could not score points. I think people will forget, and when we switch to offense in a week or two, we'll look at that. But I think the yard numbers weren't bad for the offense last year. I think similarly on defense, the turnover, which is why they went forward.
The turnovers are poor.
I think they were really good last year, but could not turn the ball over.
Yeah. So I actually have it right here. So they are third in yards, which is, that's typically the ranking across the league. So the third NFL defense. They had seventh in points. And then in regard to interceptions, let me try to find that real quick. Ranked 28th in the league. So that's definitely that's a telltale sign of what they could be doing.
And they were 29th the year before, so it's 27th year before that. So that's a major. And everyone talks about why Forbes over Gonzalez. There you go.
There it is.
Gonzalez, he's a talented corner. I evaluate him too. Don't get me wrong, but I think Forbes has the best opportunity to transition with the talent around him to create turnovers, which that's what I think that's the difference, of playoffs in my opinion.
And the toughness too, Adam. I think you touched on Forbes and the tenaciousness that he has in run support. I think he's going to give his full effort. He might not get the tackle every single time, but he'll throw a shoulder in there, which I think Del Rio likes and appreciates. Rivera too.
Especially for a guy that only weighs 180 pounds. I see him go in there and put his helmet down. It's a big thing. But I definitely think that is a huge reason as to why. The other reason, and I was thinking about this with Quan Martin, I was a huge Brian Branch guy from Alabama. Is kind of the guy. He went one pick ahead of Quan there. And I remember talking to Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl about like how that went down and why Washington wouldn't have, what would it have cost to jump 2 spaces to be able to get Brian Branch if he's the better player. And I remember Nagy says, well, I know from talking to the guys at Washington, they didn't think he was the better player. Like they really did think that Quan Martin, who was one of the biggest risers in the draft because of the measurables. And what we've seen a lot here in Washington under Ron Rivera is they are big on those RAS scores, and they will, much like Jamin Davis a couple of years ago, they will bet on your traits and their ability to get you there. And that definitely is a Quan Martin pick type thing.
And Doug, I don't know if either one of you guys caught the Commanders log with the behind the scenes in the war room for the Commanders draft pick. Basically, someone approached Martin Mayhew and was like, "Hey, we're at pick 16. We have Gonzalez and Forbes on the books. Which one do you want to pick?" And he's like, "Forbes." He's like, "I've always thought that was a better player." He openly said that he thought he was a better prospect. So Martin Mayhew's high on him, so it's good.
What was crazy when you mentioned that, I also saw that same thing that they were looking at that Iowa pass rusher,
Van Ness. Luca Van Ness.
I'll be honest with you, I'm really excited how everything panned out, because I'm not saying Van Ness wouldn't have been a good player, especially on this defense, but man, that would have really, I think, shook a lot of people up, because I think that those positions, they're not quite the premium as cornerback. And we talked about, before the draft, it was Carlos Rogers over 15 years ago, whatever years ago it was. So it was like, I'm glad
Me too.
Later I was glad that didn't happen, because I don't think that's a good scenario.
I agree.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing, which was interesting, because we talked a bunch on this show about the idea of maybe taking a D end in the first round if the best one was available. So I think that's great. So I think the defense is led. I think they've all along, we've thought as the fan base and maybe even them as a coaching staff, that the team was led by the defensive line. And while I still believe the football is, at its core, a game of 2 lines pushing against each other, I think this defense and it's, dare I say, innovation, is getting 5 and 6 defensive backs on the field as much as they can. They have invested a lot of resources into the position, whether it be draft capital or trade, bringing back in a guy like Fuller. So I think as we're breaking these rosters down, or this roster and the position groups throughout the summer, I think it's important to remember this is the bread and butter of the defense, and everything that they want to achieve this year, I personally think, will rely on this group being at its best and flying around and turning the ball over. Got to get turnovers this year. Well, fellas, we will come back. Let's see. We'll do offensive line next. And I think that we're looking at maybe 2 weeks out for that one.
Sounds
So,
good.
George, you're going on vacation next week, I think.
I'm going to Ocean City over the weekend. I'm going Saturday, coming back Tuesday night. So I can record next Wednesday or something. Yeah, but going to Ocean City.
Well, have a safe trip, man, and we'll see you guys next week.
All right, have a good one, guys.
Okay, guys, take care.